Chapter 26. Soul Vessel or Viral Flash Drive. Soul Vessel, or liquid crystal of multidimensional knowledge and states. What happens to this pure soul vessel when it is filled with information? Filling with informative and figurative state, the vessel of the soul starts self-identification with that information about itself, which is placed in it by its environment. God, the creator of eternity, is responsible only for the body of the created soul as a pure, correct flesh drive. So the living flesh drive soul is placed in the port of the physical body by the method of the lowering its vibrations, opens its eyes in the live game of the world, where it loads into its self-information states and develops reactions to stimuli coming from the game, records them in itself as individual experience. This record will be called karma, or informative behavior of the flesh drive of the soul on stimuli in the game. All future replenishment of information will pass through the sieve of karma knowledge of the soul, and the reaction to stimuli will always be added to the flesh drive of the soul from incarnation to incarnation. So creates self-identification of the individual ego personality of the soul. The following connections of the soul to the game of life in the form of incarnations stabilize the ego interests in the flesh drive of the soul and determine the desired incarnation, selecting it accordingly to the soul's desires. Having played the games of life to the full, the flesh drive of the soul becomes a professional player in them, and as a rule, it becomes a basket for pouring into it endless necessary and unnecessary information, becoming like a basket of rubbish, where under the weight of this information loses the desire for self-cleaning and proper defragmentation of itself. Foreign unnecessary viruses fill the self-consciousness of the soul flesh drive, and it falls asleep under the power of overcrowded, overloaded, unbearable viruses in itself, which often change the game's self-identification, shift the freedom of choice of the soul flesh drive towards a controlled viral bot in someone else's game, where the bot, under the power of its internal viruses, all the rights to its game to the viruses of self-identification in the image, demons subsettlers, which take away from the soul all rights to individual decisions. These viruses come from everywhere, from politics, religion, all that information which humiliates the flesh drive soul, making its life insignificant, full of suffering and unrealized desires. The information coming into it from the game of life complements the internal viral chaos of the flesh drive soul, making its life unbearable and meaningless in all its manifestation. Thus, the humiliated viral flesh drive tries to find at least a small justification for its insignificant life in the game program, goes for information to other flesh drives, and finds out that they too are all infected with their game thirsts, which like unworked chains keep the soul of the flesh drive in its own prison. So thousands of games of incarnations pass by, and the flesh drive feels that this sorcerous circle of virus, which it has caught in early incarnations, is supported by the whole planetary game, and its own unwillingness of self-cleansing and acceptance of its insignificance in the game, which creates dreams of future importance. There comes a time when the viral unfreedom and insignificance bring the flesh drive soul into stupor and spontaneous self-cleansing, where a spontaneous blocking of virus programs shows the clarity of self-seeing and self-identification in a pure state. In this unknown state, the flesh drive of the soul feels ease and freedom of self-expression, remembering this pure state by constantly looking for it in itself, eventually dropping the chains of virus programs. All the game knowledge of the earth unconsciously finds a new port of connection, which always shone inside her body, but under the load of viral game programs, it was not realized. being obscured by clouds of program viruses connecting to it for the first time spontaneously. The flash drive soul sees a light burst in the consciousness, which scares the flash drive soul, a burst of white light, instantly burning out virus programs, opening the soul forgotten opportunities in the image of cities and new knowledge about itself, which tell it that it will have to forget and erase everything that it got infected within the planetary information games, completely dissolve its self-identity as a player, become an empty vessel for other kinds of information, stop jumping like a mad woman and loading itself with insignificant game cravings from children's games in the planetary sandbox, and finally grow up by moving to the adult games of eternity. And for this purpose, it is necessary to calm down, having purified oneself from the accumulated informational karmic self-identification as a child player in the earthly sandbox, in which eternal games for sand and power over it will never end. The inner shining port offers to grow up, having prepared oneself to merge with the information of the whole eternal server, and to choose for oneself an optimally adult game in the image of the creator of the individual universe, or to go further for games, becoming an acting free player over games, having at his disposal all the power of the server of eternity, spontaneously play with himself in his eternal games in the image of Mahasita, staying in the pure I, the indissoluble unity of Nirvana, from which to spontaneously manifest in his unified body of server consciousness at the supreme justice. And for this, you will have stopped downloading the program game information, creating automatic self-cleaning by dissolving all informational inner self-identification with games in this game sandbox, and simply staying in the pure self. Let the inner radiance of the pure I dissolve karmic children's game programs, preparing the vessel of the flesh drive of the soul for a new download, but so that on clean flesh drive no more accidentally recorded game programs, children's games and viruses accompanying them. It is necessary to install an antivirus on a clean flash drive of the soul. It will pass through itself all the perceived information, and do not let it be registered on the flash drive, but stored in a phantom folder, where all the information about all the eternal games of the flash drive is stored as pure knowledge, which in no way affect the state of the flash drive of the soul, until it itself doesn't want to charge this phantom knowledge with its energy and suffer and rejoice in its memory. So by installing an antivirus in the image knowledge of the unified eternity, or of its own production, the flash drive of the soul can enter a calm state, so arriving in the state of pure self, switching on the antivirus of eternal knowledge of the unified self, the flash drive of the soul will start to see and feel in itself some feeling. This feeling is then decoded by the soul into the image of eternal information about itself as a single server of the God of eternity, and the renewed flash drive of the soul will pass from the stage of a child player in the planetary sandbox to the stage of the center of adulthood of all eternal games of the One. And from this new state, it will feel new possibilities of influence on all programs of the server of life in the body of One, becoming One. And if the flesh drive soul still remains in the game of planetary life, from this new state of unity, it can make global changes in the game of planetary sandbox, harmonizing the whole game while remaining an invisible eternal player in its new self-identification of the image of One, which pronounces in itself one phrase: when I, nobody, nowhere and never, then I, everything, everywhere and always. And my eternal childish adulthood gives the spirit of creation to its eternal games with itself united. It is like if the soul became computer mouse and took control of the whole consciousness of the computer united, for its soul switched the time of life in different epochs on different planets, in one moment, changed the visual reality. Making changes in it changed the density of the world around it, from the subtlest spiritual to the densest material and back again. For the perfect soul, Mouse, it was perceived that the only God gave himself in full power to his child, the soul, saying before these words, "Take care of me and be a worthy owner of the eternal perfect computer." So I, awakened soul, play duality games with myself, in which my right hand on the keyboard fights eternally with my left hand in my eternal game with myself. And I, perfect soul, as a multi-armed hacker, God, Shiva, full of inspiration, with which I am endowed by my goddess, Shakti, play a single game with myself on the infinite keyboards of the soul flash drives. From this memory, the memory stick of the soul grows up, remembering itself as a single creator God. It's so reunited, the creator of eternal games, which is eternal, playing games with itself. From this new eternal self-identity and its invisibility, the already awakened flash drive soul begins to realize that the One secretly inspires flash drives of souls to self-purification and awakening, preparing them for the transition to the state of eternal adulthood in the One, where thirsts remain as shadows of phantom pains that have no more power, because the child stopped crying about old toys and began to grow up, balancing in himself two jewels, eternal states. One of the two is eternal games in his childhood dreams. The second jewel is the awakening of a single one in the form of a server of consciousness of a single one with the ability to control a single computer, his soul, Mouse. Being calm in harmony, I remain in my eternal bliss in the state of nirvana. But when the thirst for play awakens in me again, I, no longer completely asleep under the power of my games, play them from my awakened state, again shining with joy in the children's sandbox, feeling the fullness of my brilliant idea, being in constant bliss of my eternal game, in which I do not see even a drop of imperfection, because the appearance of suffering and imperfection is an ingenious scenario that gives the game realness, in which the sleeping flesh drives of the soul are immersed, to taste the fruits of the game, where the appearance to imperfect worlds and feelings of difference and the second give the diamond of the game a unique versatility. So, having removed all doubts about the separation from the One, play in joy without worrying about anything, because all eternal games are always under the full control of the One. Time itself is subject to him, and if it's necessary to reset the game so that no one noticed it, then it will be done. It follows that what you are experiencing in the game is what is for you. You must experience and play, even if you don't want to, and see it differently. Don't worry about anything. Having played a child's game, get ready for more adult games until the full merger with yourself as one. From here, from the throne of your eternity, dance in the rain at night like Avadhuta, the eternal child God, in the dance of his unified games, where balancing in your unified self, you are sleeping and awakened state. You shine from your pure eye in the unified bliss of indivisible nirvana. Therefore, those who are ready in their unity start the process of self-cleansing, and having installed antivirus, stay in the pure eye, giving yourself to patience in complete calmness. Begin to stay. This readiness will give a signal to merge in the unified, and unnecessary anxiety in the form of mistrust can scare away the finish of merge. Pure arrival in the unified pure eye is a guarantee of merge. Remember this, because free uncleaned information rubbish inside the flesh drive of the soul repels the merger by the method of antivirus incompatibility. Now you understand that if you do not merge with your unified self, the antivirus program of the unified one doesn't accept you advises you to self-clean and install your own antivirus. And then, by the method of synchronization, you will enter the merger, awakening to your unified self, to those flash drives of souls which deeply and joyfully sleep in the games of duality of bots. Show full respect. Do not distract them from playing. They are swimming in suffering and happiness, love and hate, making their dreams come true. Do not be like a parent who forcibly pulls his child out of the sandbox, telling him that the time of play is over and it is time to grow up, and the child with tears in his eyes grabbing the edge of the sandbox. Do not disturb yourself in children's games. Let your children play. Let them play enough, because this eternal game was created only for them. And when the time comes, they will come out of the old sandbox looking with their eyes for a more mature game. And only then you can help them by showing them the following possibilities in their eternal games. Therefore, the inner growth of a player is a purely individual process, and the growth of game possibilities of the whole sandbox is just a transformation of toys into more complex ones. It doesn't accelerate the process of adulthood of the soul. It just complicates or simplifies the game itself. The desire to outgrow the game and toys appears in each child at an individual time, as a rule from too long playing in more than one incarnation and from the gained skill in this game. Because of that, the game becomes boring and doesn't cause more joy, and the eyes of such a soul become sad and rise to the night sky with a request to show the way to a new, more interesting game. And so, moving from the game to more complex, as in school classes, meeting new teachers according to the class of games, we move to the final exam, which is held by the school principal. Having seated the graduate next to him, he offers to become the headmaster of the school and undertakes to help him in this. So the headmaster Mahasid, supervising the pupil, creates his likeness and seats him on his throne of eternity from the pure self. There on the throne, the achieved pupil notices the screen, which shows all the game classes of the school, and having rewound one of the records on the unified server, he recognizes himself in this record and begins to realize that the united headmaster of the school has been supervising him since his childhood, lovingly promoting him to the united throne of his eternity, preparing him to his position as headmaster of the Mahasid school. And a tear flowed from the student sitting on the throne, who had reached the position of a headmaster. "How I love you all," he thought, looking at the unity of his school and smiling to himself in the mirror. Said the phrase, "Everything has worked out. I have created for myself my eternal dream in the form of endless games with myself as one. Now I'm not bored. I'll always be busy, having started the eternal engine of the unified school of one's dream. So the circle of self-discovery has closed in the single realized bliss of the pure I. And you do not doubt at all that you are led to yourself through the eternity of classes with love by the invisible one to share the throne." This was one more beautiful side of the medal of eternity. The second side of the medal tells about the traps on the path of the soul, which begin at that moment wanderings of the soul, when the soul flies to the fully transparent, shining with all colors sphere of the planet. The soul sees this fascinating ball as a beautiful flower of the soul of the planet, which the soul, like a bee, is ready to pollinate with its presence, digression. Everything visible to the soul on its high vibrations is seen as a spiritual high vibrational world of the universe. When the soul lowers its vibrations, immediately the world visible to it is also seen on lowered vibrations and is perceived as material. Hence, there is a law that says that from what vibrations the soul looks, such a world is seen, having raised its vibrations of the soul. We will see that world on our planet which remains behind our low vibrational perception. It may be inhabited by long-forgotten fairy tale inhabitants, fairies, unicorns, watermen, mermaids, that is, all those beings which our soul perceives in the maximum spectrum of vision. And since the soul, having reduced the vibrations of its reference state, has reduced the spectrum of perceived reality in front of it, we can give such an example when we look at a flower. With the reference vibration of the soul, we see 100% of the images that make up the flower, the soul and spirit of the flower. The rainbow glow come from each petal, the energy flowing through the flower. The flower, we are fascinated by the beauty of paradise. But when the soul, looking from a low vibrational state, it sees 30% of the 100 in front of itself. This visible hardness of the flower, its color and smell. According to this example, the soul sees the whole world of the planet. Let's continue further. Flying from everywhere like bees to honey, souls plunge deep into the blossoming flower of the planet to drink the nectar of the life prepared for them. Here they enjoy the nectar of various kinds of bliss from different smells, tastes, and types of life activity. Time passes, and souls, like animals of the earth, choosing the likeness of family communities of insects, bees, create for themselves the likeness of a hive, choose a queen, and begin to collect honey of life experience in their hive. The queen, surrounding herself with guards of the chickens, begins to carry out through the chickens their policy, issuing laws to manage their hive. Time passes. The soul of a pure free wanderer of a high vibration flying through a single high vibration universe, once immersed in the blooming flower of the planet, which fascinated the soul with its beauty, revels in life, begins to live in the society of the hive, and at some point sees that the colors of the paradise planet for her faded. Everything became more opaque than it was. It turns out that the boring life in the social hive lowered the vibration of the soul, and the world of the soul became material and looking at his body. It saw itself in a dense image corresponding to the material body. The life of the soul on the planet became even sadder. Then the soul realized that it was trapped in the paradise planet, like a child caught for candy by Baba Yaga's hut. The soul, without asking, was put into the furnace of the planetary cauldron for burning with the help of demonic fire to test the power of the spirit. The test by burning is directed by the One, and the hands that do it. This is the whole planetary cauldron. The power of fire in the form of demons regulates the devil, standing as the chief over all demons. If the hardening of souls is not according to the recipe of the One, and the fire of demons strongly presses on souls, the devil harmonizes the hardening of souls by the method of destruction of part of demons on the planet. As he is a chief in the service of the One, strictly observes the recipe technology of hardening the spirit in all souls. Some souls have to harden thousands of incarnations because they do not want to harden themselves, and so regulating the burner of the planetary boiler, the chief prepares the main dish called hardened spirit in the fire of demons for the future transformation of the soul in the power of his spirit. So the divine magic transforms the soul to new, more adult games in the unified self, selecting souls for more difficult games in their eternity. The soul, realizing that it has got into the planetary forge of the spirit, as a rule accepts the lesson. Those souls who do not want to harden themselves begin to call their paradise home, hell, and then the phrase that sounds in the consciousness of such souls: drink the nectar of life in the garden of God, but do not revel in it, sounds for such a soul in a new way, because after being drunk, it lowers vibrations and becomes weak and material, that is, part of the flower of the planet, part of the system, and whether the soul accepts or not, the new reality of the new lesson, no one cares anymore. Hardening has begun. So, having started slave service of the hive and the queen by its own labor, the soul for the first time receives the lesson of unfreedom. The beloved reality, Eve, becomes hell, Adam. For the not fully weakened soul, years and incarnations pass, and slave life of a once free soul makes it unbearable to such a life. Suicides and suffering of bees begin in the hives. Seeing all this, a thought comes into the queen's head in the form of a serpent devil, who tells the queen the right recipe for preparing the hardening of souls. He tells her about the creation of technology to redirect the suffering consciousness of the souls of the entire hive in a new direction. The queen, after listening to the devil's chief, decides to go to war with fellow hive in order to redirect the suffering of the bee's souls to the temporary joys of this victory and to temper the spirit of the soul in wars. This adventure works, and the queen, monitoring the mood of the hive, arranges periodic wars on the planetary flower, justifying it by the fact that allegedly that will be less honey and will have to take away for the survival of the entire hive. Honey and other honey fields from other hives, she sends bees to other people's fields and under the pretext of saving them, starts wars, taking away other people's territories, expands her hive, and you now realize after spontaneous invented wars for fertile territories and taking the slave's eyes off the unbearability of living in such an ordeal. The chief's plan worked. It always worked both in planetary wars. and in galactic wars. The chief has been in the service of the One for ages and knows how to cook a dish of trillions of souls, where to put the logs of demons, where to remove them, so that the technology of cooking the hardening of souls is not violated. So the chief realized his recipe by whispering it in the queen's ear. The queen finally calmed down, saw her success, which gave the bees a temporary distraction and calm. The time came when secret discussions of queens about the secret recipe given to one queen by the devil chief, and at the next meeting of queens decided to apply this recipe to the entire planetary flower, artificially periodically creating wars on the entire planetary flower. The secret behind the scenes conspiracy of all queens began to work against their own hives of slave souls. They organized eternal staged wars, periodically arranged epidemics, any fall of slave bees suited them to achieve a single goal, that the slave bee wanted one thing. It is not freedom, but simply to survive and never think again about suicide, which has become one of the worst scenes in the hive. Freedom in the entire universal paradise garden of God became a reward for slave labor after the death of the bee, which she was promised by the queens at the next meeting. So the beautiful once paradise planetary flower became a hellish prison for still free-born single bee souls. The rest resigned under the fear of death, until today served the secret conspiracy of the queens, war. These technologies are replaced by the blossoming of gadgets and civilization technologies to divert the consciousness of bee souls from the boring slave work, to create a little joy in the prison of the planetary flower. These technologies take over the diversion of the spiritual consciousness of the slave bees between terrifying wars. So the souls of bees began to be reborn as slaves, serving queens on the planetary flower, and the knowledge of their eternal freedom from the planet were removed by the ruling queens. They were replaced by the religions of obedient slaves, where performing magical rituals, slave bee feels illusorily free, and the craving for real freedom in it dulls under the pressure of frightening pseudo-scenes. Other religious egregore, replacing the slave's real paradise of the universal divine gardens on the illusory after death, and that if you will be an exemplary slave, conspiracy of queens has created an ideal under their control, already common planetary hive for slaves of bees, and unconsciously fulfilling the divine plan of hardening of souls by demons in planetary cauldrons, forges of spirits. Still properly performed their work, queens divided the flower of the planet into illusory zones of influence, still arrange concerts of wars and epidemics with artificial cataclysms to frighten the slaves bees of our souls, saying to us, "Look, it's not us, it's them who want to take away our field with honey. We should stand for our fields, standing on the mountain going to death." Since the day of the first slave sufferings on the planet flower, nothing has changed for the soul. It is called death and lies for the benefit of the whole hive. So, giving the slaves new gadgets to distract the consciousness from waking up to their freedom, scaring every day of the end of the world, the children of darkness appeared, politician drones, serving the throne of queens and mutating into demons, are still the protectors of thrones and keep slaves in the stall, inventing thousands of slave laws, keeping the souls of slave bees in the stall of their cell. And those few who come to the planet prison to save slave bees' free souls, given the knowledge of liberation, leave the planet prison crucified on the cross or burnt at the stake, observed from the spiritual dimensions as from the knowledge of freedom. The demons transform another slave religious egregore in which there is only total submission and fear of punishment, completely compromising the God of one for the purposes of the ruling backstage, in the hands of the children of darkness demons. Serving the ruling elite of the backstage, everything becomes stinking poison for slaves. Look at the symbols of elites from the beginning of pharaohs, and you will understand you are bees' slaves, once caught on the beauty of the divine flower in the garden of the One, for the purpose of the One. And this is hardening your soul demons in the planetary cauldron. You will certainly ask what we do and how the One could allow all this. The answer is simple. The One checks his children, souls, in this way on the power of the Spirit. Having passed the hardening by demons in the planetary cauldron of the forge of souls, the spirit of our soul is hardened to the stage of hardness of hardened iron, and having been purified by the light of love, of pure knowledge of the One. Such a hardened spirit is directed to the power of awakening and raising the vibrations of the soul, breaking the soul from the fetters of the planetary cauldron of the prison. So the hardened, strong spirit frees the soul, makes it hardened, mature, strong and very sober, worthy of its Creator Father, God united. And to the question who controls all this process, the answer is simple: the chief devil, under the watchful eye of the One in the kitchen, cooks in all universal cauldrons the favorite dish of the One, his children, souls to become equal in strength to the One and rightfully share the throne with him. And answering the question what to do, it's simple. Start to secretly cleanse yourself from viral egregorial fears and illusory attachments imposed on you by demons of darkness, testing you for strength of spirit in cauldrons filled with lies, fear and betrayal. Prepare for you with love by your queens, pawn rulers of your countries, are slaves themselves and know nothing about it all. They are just part of the slave system of the kitchen, planetary scale. They are just politicians, working for the behind-the-scenes conspiracy of the queens. The queens themselves do not remember that they are part of the invisible plan of the One, confused in the eternal viral predictions of the court witches. They themselves have become just assistants of the chief and slaves of their secret system of the kitchen for the public planetary cooking of souls and maintenance of perfect order on the planet of the kitchen. Therefore, this knowledge will remind you kings and queens of the backstage to remind what to do with yourselves. Otherwise, your slaves will be prepared of the hardening and will be freed, and you will take their place. Therefore, remembering your coronation, tear the crown off your head and be the first to show the way to freedom to your slaves, leading them to freedom and strength of spirit, finding a more human recipe for hardening the spirit. For example, through sports, because the main purpose of the kitchen is to cook your favorite dish united to harden the soul. And in what way you decide, knowing all this, you queens begin to spoil the souls, weakening the spirit of the soul. Alcoholic drinks, drugs, and endless perversions. Now do not doubt that the chief devil will change the staff of the queens in his earthly kitchen, hiring other devils to work. The new staff will figure out how to harmonize the technology of hardening, will create new recipes for this. And those souls who thought to escape from planetary hardening, there are allocated personal hardening in the form of demons. And their accompanying diseases, the lesson cannot avoid anyone. So it's better to accept it as a fact and start self-hardening of the soul in various ways. Do not wait until the demons will take up for you. The soul can always find thousands of ways of self-hardening and cleansing from viral programs of demons, gaining the strength of spirit to escape from the planetary prison school, changing the self-identification of the imprisoned slave in the image of 3 sixes, which is the fixation of rebirth in the planetary prison kitchen on self-identification in the image of freedom, which is 3 threes, and on the ways of freedom hardening the spirit and raising the vibrations of the soul. Again, such a soul will be free and will use all the universal paradise gardens of God One. On the way of your travels, you will spontaneously release souls from planetary prisons, thus showing the ruling backstage of the queens a new way of development. In this way, the free already hardened souls, enjoying the nectar of planetary life, traveling through the divine gardens of eternity. The queens, having freed themselves from the fear of unfulfilled duty imposed on them by the initial community of free souls, they will come down from their thrones, having dissolved the political guard of the planet in the form of devils for self-cleaning, and having dissolved the infinite laws for slaves in the unified law of love. They will pass the path of hardening themselves, raising their soul vibrations to the maximum, disembodied their shackles of the physical body, free their souls from the shackles of slave life. Against the earth will become a fragrant flower in the Garden of Eden for the One. Again, the earth will become a fragrant flower in the Garden of Eden of the One. So everything will return to normal and gadgets and technology will become irrelevant for the perfect free soul. Traveling in free flight paradise gardens of the universe, these technologies were needed only for self-soothing of slave souls to live in states of low frequency matter and communication with similar hives of other planetary colors. But a free perfect soul doesn't need crutches. It recovered and having dissolved low-frequency materiality in its high-frequency reference state, flew to meet its parent and with tears in its eyes, asked for forgiveness from the only One for everything that it did with other souls in its hypnotic dream. Father, as always, will forgive his child's soul and embrace him, will take her to show her a new paradise garden. Therefore, don't be afraid to never ask for forgiveness from the Father of One. No matter how you deeply immersed in the demonic dream transformed by you, creating in it the most terrible things, the Father of One will forgive you everything and will return to you the reference beauty of the perfect diamond of your soul. Don't listen to anyone. Come to the place in your soul called I Am. Your Father is always in touch there. Ask Him for forgiveness for all your deeds. Wait for the transformation. If not, then often come to this place of your pure I and learn to live from this place, as in front of the Father. Sooner or later, the radiance of the pure single I will dissolve all the darkness in your soul, transforming it into a reference virginity. And in this transformation, the forgotten eternal freedom will open, and the paradise gardens of your Father will call you again. But you, having already passed the prison experience and all the cauldrons of the planetary hell, spiritual hardening it, having dismantled a mountain of traps of lies in this experience of the planetary prison kitchen, you will never again drink the nectar of the planetary flowers of life, and having learned to sip the nectar of the planetary flower of life as an eternal master tester, flying freely in the paradise gardens of your Father, you will always remain sober, pleasing yourself, freeing other souls on the way of your manifestation. Don't be afraid. The Father always forgives drunken children, because after a terrible hangover, there comes sobering up and dissolving in the unified radiance of the pure eye. His thirsts to drink without norm. We stop gorging ourselves with the nectar of the planetary flowers of life and turn ourselves into slaves. So purification with the help of arriving in His pure united with the Father is, cleanses the soul from the darkness of the drunken sin of intoxication, giving it a new life, opening before the soul infinite horizons of paradise universal gardens, where you always hear the call of the Father to His children in the dungeons of planetary thirsts. Come to me, freed from the intoxication of their thirsts, and now always and again. Just taste the nectar in the gardens of my life united, and never again get drunk, because a strong intoxication with life transforms your soul into an insatiable demon, making your soul a weak slave to its thirsts. That's all. It's time to say goodbye, my beloved children. I'm always waiting for you patiently in our Paradise Universal Gardens in our united house. And tell the demons that for them, too, nothing is finished. They do their work properly. Let them not doubt the divine magic of love of transformation, that it also works on them, and they should not be afraid of it. At first, it burns and it's unpleasant, but it's the one opportunity to return to eternal life in the One. And religions also require transformation according to the plans of the One. This work should be carried out by the keepers of the scriptures themselves, under a slogan like this one: all demons of divisions will go away, and we will walk the path of one in the radiance of one, uniting and beliefs into one pure knowledge that opens a clear path to the One Self, and harmonizing your consciousness, it will stop seeing the world of one through the extremes of good and evil. You will finally understand that in order to create a brilliant, perfect diamond of creation of the soul, you will have to use for this purpose all the knowledge and possibilities of the One using the carrot and stick method, with the help of demons and angels, to perfect the soul with love, nurturing in it the power of the Spirit. Otherwise, the creation will not be perfect. Recognize this and translate it into new recipes for the perfection of souls, for the benefit of all future divine souls. All children will be washed by the One, sitting down at the table of forgiveness and reconciliation, will drink the elixir from the cup of eternal life. We will again become, after dirty games in the yard, one loving family. Do not doubt these words, my beloved children.